From Live Consulting, this is Cannabis Business Minds with your hosts, Kristen Yoder and Simone Simaluka-Radzins.
So on today's show, we've got Steve Owens from Adherence Compliance, who is going to talk to us about cannabis compliance. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Good to have you. We heard that you're in Pennsylvania right now?
Yes, our company is in Colorado, California, Washington, Oregon, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Illinois, and then a few other markets, Puerto Rico and Guam, and things like that. So we do serve a lot of clients in different markets.
Yeah. I mean, I think we got too excited because we're like, what has he been working on? But we gave you seriously just the shortest intro ever about what you've done, how you got into the cannabis industry and all of that. So before we, dive deep into kind of what your company does, can you walk us through kind of how you evolved into the cannabis industry and what got you started with Adherence Compliance?
Sure. I was working in management consulting on a $25 million oil and gas revenue and asset management project for a company here in Denver, Colorado. And a friend who owns a few dispensaries and cultivation centers came to me with the regulations one evening and said, what would you do with this? And so I came up with a concept to come up with codification libraries or compliance libraries for the federal, state, city, and county level, and then basically manage that through an integrated compliance platform. And so we partnered with Apple and Amazon to deliver our software. So I've been fortunate enough to use my background from companies like Oracle and AT&T, and then utilize that experience in the cannabis space to build an enterprise compliant platform.
Oh, wow. And just for our listeners, like, what year is this?
2014. It was the beginning of 2014 when I first came up with the concept to identify risk. And at its core level, if I look at a dispensary license, cultivation license, a manufacturer license, a distributor license, I want to know what the operational risk is on that license, both from a regulatory perspective and a financial perspective. Mm-hmm. So from a regulatory perspective, say here in Colorado, I would look at the Colorado regulatory environment, what they have at the state level. At the federal level, I already know that we need to be Department of Agriculture, OSHA, EPA, IRS compliant, and those agencies at that level. And then we also have a city and county component as well, because there can be certificates of occupancy, special use or land permits, things of that nature. And so the goal was to quantify risk, my operational risk, and to develop a score and standardize all businesses. So every medical dispensary in Colorado is evaluated with the same criteria. And then we're able to, with a standardized fashion, we're able to evaluate everybody effectively on a scale from 0 to 100. And so in Colorado, I think our average score is about an 82%, which is not great. But Colorado is also a very far developed market.
No, absolutely. And just to elaborate a little bit on that, so you've developed this library and you're able to kind of solve the problem of kind of risk in the cannabis industry. But what does that mean when you're working with cannabis operators, when you're working with consultants like ourselves? Like, how do we all fit into, the solution with Adherence Compliance?
Absolutely. So our software, the Adherence Score app, which is on the Apple App Store, so a little plug there.
Oh, cool.
Our software basically connects it's encrypted. Our iPad app is encrypted. And essentially you would log in. And so you guys are in California.
Yep.
Let's say you have California based in Los Angeles of 10 dispensaries and 5 cultivation centers. So you as a consulting business would log in. You would have those clients loaded. It would pull up the requirements for those clients based on the location. So if they're at 101 Main Street in Los Angeles City, Los Angeles County, we understand that when we enter in the license criteria, and then it pulls up all the requirements that you need for that license. And so you as a consultant, as an owner-operator, an attorney, a CPA, a government regulator, can utilize our software to go through and evaluate one of these cannabis businesses, our cannabis licenses, if you will, because at the end of the day, we're evaluating an operational cannabis license. And then you're able to provide a criterion score. And so we say we score 85% on a medical dispensary in Los Angeles, California. we know we need to improve. We have some closure risk. It's a low to medium closure risk if you score in the 80s. So with our software, which is available in all of these different markets, we're basically able to provide folks scores that are meaningful. And so as an example, in Colorado, average scores for dispensaries around 82. If we go to California markets and what we're seeing there on some of the early inspections we're doing, it's much lower.
Like what?
Washington is lower.
What, like how, because we're in California and we completely agree.
Yeah, we're very aware of the lack of oversight, operations, regulations, SOPs
exactly.
in California.
And a lot of these guys are really trying to get there. So just to give some comparison, in like this Colorado regulated market, regulated for quite some time compared to us in California where we're implementing now these standards of regulation, what's the lower score in California compared to Colorado?
Great question. So we're seeing 77, 76
oh, wow.
For dispensaries in the California market. And so what we've seen statistically, and we've done over 500 licensed cannabis inspections. So with our software since 2014, we went into over 500 licensed operations, right? And one could be a multi-licensed cultivation operation. So essentially we went into these and we've statistically analyzed risk, and we've captured all of this detail, notes and photos in our app. To basically provide these reports. And what the reports are is actionable intelligence on how they can fix it. And so what we've seen in the market from doing these assessments in all of these different markets, and I call a market a state, so Washington's a market, California's a market, Colorado's a market. When I look at this, Washington and Colorado, because we had a quasi-unregulated market, as the market evolved, because the voters passed legislation before the city or counties and states could catch up to it, we see lower compliance scores. So in Washington, California, Colorado, we see lower compliance scores on average, 82 or lower, than a market like Illinois. Illinois is very compliant from the start. The average score is 97.
Wow.
In Illinois, for a medical dispensary. They're outstanding because they're highly regulated up front, and they evolved from a different market. So in California, Washington, Colorado, and markets like that, they've evolved from more of an enthusiast market, people that were delivering medicine to, patient caregiver relationships and things like that nature. In markets like Maryland, Pennsylvania, Illinois, these are groups that had to be very well funded at the beginning in order to obtain a license, with putting money in escrow accounts and things of that nature. And so that's what we've seen. We know that Maryland will be a very strong market because they've developed some 400 pages, over 400 pages when we released our compliance library for that market. But we know that will be a very strong market just because of the way they're starting out. And we know that Colorado and Washington and California, it's going to be much more difficult for them to achieve the type of scores that these other states are seeing and be overall compliant because they've started off in a quasi-unregulated fashion.
And they already had strong markets before all of this, whereas the East Coast and the Midwest, they're much newer with cannabis and the amount of cannabis, the actual industry to deal with. And it's smart that they're taking lessons from all these other states that are struggling with it. And they're also much smaller.
They are much smaller.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Right.
So we're always about let's solve this problem, right? So we know that already that California operators are going to have a little bit more trouble getting as compliant as, an Illinois-based company, just based off of statistics that you've been able to see through, the risk score. So what can they do?
What they can do is California is going to be even more complex than any other market because of the dual licensing mechanism. So you're going to have a license at the city or county level and then also at the state level. There's much more regulatory agencies involved. There's 17 different license types. California is going to be a very complex market. And so what we see in these other markets, like Colorado's complex because of the amount of regulatory code that we have and that we have to interpret and be compliant with as an operational business. California is going to be the same way, and they have many more state agencies that are going to be involved and have tentacles in the operations of these marijuana licenses. And so what these businesses can do is start now, absolutely now, with making sure they have compliant standard operating procedures, make sure that they have training programs in place for compliance and also health and safety, and make sure they're signing off on everything as far as making sure employees are trained in watching their OSHA videos, their Department of Agriculture videos, things of that nature. And then develop a proactive compliance plan, because if you're not compliant, it's going to cost you in the long run. The cost is dramatic, right? So these businesses here in Colorado, if they get caught with inventory that they haven't reconciled for, say, a week, that could be thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars for fines if the MED chooses to issue a fine or a violation for inventory. And when they do issue a fine or a violation for inventory, it's errors and omission. So that's one violation. And then you get another one for conduct. And so it's 2 for 1. And so what I think these businesses don't understand in California is there's no yesterday. How you operated yesterday doesn't exist. You have to rethink your entire business from the ground up with compliance.
Yeah.
You've got the next 6 months to get in shape realistically. And so we're working with businesses in, we don't mention names, but say San Jose and Oakland, and we're making sure that they're compliant right now on all of the available regulations that we have, for the medical side in California right now for 2018. And so they want to be compliant as they can for 2018 by the middle of summer, early fall. And then from there, they focus on revenue and inventory and things of that nature. And so compliance is a critical component that can cost you your license, because at the end of the day, it's a privilege to sell, cultivate, or manufacture, or distribute marijuana. And so if you're not compliant, you're running a risk. And if you're running a risk, what is that risk? What's the quantifiable measure of that risk? And that's what we, as a software company, determine. And so we use our software we provide our software to CPA. We provide it to attorneys, state regulators. We're working with proposals in California right now. Cities and counties need help. And so we have programs like our government agency program for regulatory authorities, where we can offer them in-sourced or outsourced solutions. So this, a city of X, if you will, can choose to utilize our software and our training and launch a compliance program right away from inception with their regulations inside our software and our compliance libraries. Or they can outsource it to us, an independent, trusted third party, and then we can do the compliance inspections on their behalf if they don't have the staff and things of that nature to support their compliance programs. And so those are the things that we're developing along with our cannabis banking program that are really kind of meeting the needs of the industry. Because at the end of the day, every single stakeholder of a marijuana business, from the investor all the way to the banker to the regulator, needs to understand what the score is. What is the compliance score, the risk level for these businesses?
100%.
And then, no pun intended, but weed out the weak ones, right?
Yeah.
So,
I know Kristen has a question, but I need to step in really quick. I heard banking, cash management solution, and this is something when people come consult, they're like, we need to know what banking options are out there. Talk to us about this solution that you kind of, that you mentioned a little bit. Can you give us some more insight on that?
Sure. So it's available on our website. I wrote a 11-page white paper titled How to Bank a Marijuana Account, a Compliance Guide for Financial Institutions. And I've developed a 5-step process. I was lucky enough to work with some banks here in Colorado very early on as they've developed compliance programs.
Cool.
And I've seen things done appropriately and correct, and I've seen things that are not correct. And if you think of a bank, how does a bank have to be compliant? They need to satisfy Banking Secrecy Act, anti-money laundering, FinCEN, Cole Memo.
FinCEN, it's a lot. It's a lot of compliance that they have to do just to even take these operators on.
Right. And so what we see is the banks need to do their due diligence up front. And then the onboarding and the screening and application process, there's a bank here in Colorado that requires 40-some documents that you have to check off and provide as part of your application to go through that process, because as part of Know Your Customer, I need to know the background on not only you and anybody associated with the license, but all the investors. I want tax history of 3 years, things of that nature. So it's almost like going through a mini application process again when you're signing up for these banks. And what we've seen so far is the smaller banks, the private banks, and the credit unions are the ones that are stepping in, and the larger banks that have interstate payment network and rely more on federal and things of that nature are not stepping in. And then certain areas of the country, I don't want to mention anyone specifically, but the Federal Reserve will say no initiation SAR, which is a suspicious activity report at account inception to identify that, hello, this is a marijuana account. And so they'll say no. If they see any of those come across, they'll automatically screen and shut those down. But there'll be a Federal Reserve in a certain other area of the nation that is not as stringent and is letting those go through. And so it's different from the way they're handled. But what we've done is develop this 5-step program that we teach banks, and it's basically a 20-hour immersive introduction into cannabis and cannabis compliance. Because can you bank a business that's non-compliant inventory that has previous diversion? No, not unless it's been identified and reconciled. And so things of that nature need to be checked out in advance on these cannabis businesses to make sure that they are indeed bankable and that they can get financial services. If not, they're better off working in cash or until a bank can handle that risk profile. Because at the end of the day, each cannabis account has a very high risk profile.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Well, to get back to compliance, and you had mentioned inventory, how often do you find inventory issues with doing your compliance work?
That's a great question. So 3 out of 4 businesses that we inspect or licenses that we inspect fail one or more inventory infractions. And so in Colorado, we have 30-some requirements for marijuana inventory, all the way from tracking and errors of omission and daily reconciliation, things like that. And in Colorado and most states, in tracking inventory, they can offer 2 violations or citations if you have inventory violations, one for errors and omissions, one for conduct. And what I see is very difficult. So here in Colorado, as an example, which will be similar to Maryland, they're using, I have physical inventory, right? Mm-hmm. If I'm a MIP manufacturer dispensary, and I have my point of sale or my inventory system, that might not be the same as my state mandated tracking system, right? Mm-hmm. So I could use, in this hypothetical instance, I'm using physical inventory. I've got BioTrack to manage my point of sale inventory. I'm using the metric platform to manage my state managed tracking system. And then I'm using QuickBooks to manage my accounting system. And so you're asking somebody to go in and manage 4 disparate inventory systems to make sure the accounting system has proper taxation. And any daily hiccups along the road in any of those 4 systems lead to problems. And as you have problems in inventory, you deviate further and further away from compliance. And so some businesses will walk into and we'll see that their inventory is really off, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's a matter of what is the state agency going to do on inventory? Are they tracking, are they using the inventory system for traceability, or is it for enforcement? And so here in Colorado, it's not used for traceability, it's used for enforcement. So if they notice you have negative packages and things of that nature, they can fine and penalize you. Now, whether you correct that inventory, it just depends, but they can turn around and fine and penalize you again. If you have enough of these inventory red flags, then that's when they come in and do the deeper dive and then process violations. You'll have a show cause hearing. You have to go through that whole process. And it's very expensive. It's time consuming. And a lot of these businesses haven't had good inventory since inception. And California is one market that hasn't.
Yeah.
But so that's what you're looking at.
Would you say of all the different infractions that inventory is the most common one that is out there, or is that one of the major things they have to pay for when it comes to enforcement, is all of those infractions?
So what we see is statistically inventory is number 1, and then security and surveillance. And then it goes down the cycle, if you will. We have a couple white papers that are available that we share as well for top 5 lists. Here are the top 5 infractions for medical dispensaries. Here are the top 5 infractions for cultivation centers. And so we'll share things like that. And so if you look at inventory, you have to look at the regulatory authority for that market. Are they active? Do they have enough investigators? And then what are they looking for? So here in Colorado, as an example, and I'm not trying to throw Colorado under the bus, but we have about 145 licenses per inspector. There's over 3,200 operational licenses here in Colorado. So we have quite a few operational licenses, more than any other market. So we're the closest thing to what California will be very soon.
Yeah.
But are there enough statewide inspectors? No. And can they catch up with these businesses and really inspect these businesses? No, because they're still using paper clipboards and buying file cabinets. And so until that stops and until they start using some automated platform like this where they stop spending so much time collecting data and they spend more time analyzing it and making their programs better, they're going to be caught in that loop. And they won't be able to catch up because they get cherry-picked, right? People want to take their great enforcement officer.
And I think that's that's so common, though. I think
incredibly common
for any business. So many people are like just chasing, I need to get this spreadsheet or I need to get this, but they don't really analyze the data. And so funny to hear from a regulatory perspective, I guess, that challenge is there as well.
And it's important to get an inventory procedure and process in place while you're still small, because when you start to scale, you never have enough time to catch up. And then everyone you hire below you, it gets worse and worse.
Yeah.
Through each hire, unless you have it worked out. Do you find that most of these businesses have like 4 different softwares they're using for, especially with manufactured products like QuickBooks, Metric, BioTrack, or is it just that they're utilizing a POS system, the seed to sale tracking, like a BioTrack, Metric, whatever, and then an accounting system, like from your experience?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So if you can think about it, I have to make tax payments. And so if it depends on the market we're in, but let's just say there's a medical marijuana tax or you have an excise tax, something of that nature. And so I'm making a tax payment. Is my effective tax rate correct? Is the tax payment that I made from my accounting system match what's in the state mandated tracking system, right? A lot of times when I show up for one of these businesses, they'll say the inventory is incorrect in this state mandated tracking system, because I'm not trying to point any fingers. And so the client will say, but my point of sale system is correct. And that's not the right thing to tell the regulators, because at the end of the day, what can they look at? What is the low hanging fruit for a government regulator? It's pesticides, because testing, that throws up a flag. Hey, do your job. And they do it. Right? That's the easiest thing for them to get. And that's why they're so vocal with it, because it shows them doing their job. And then inventory, right? And so if they have problems with inventory reconciliation, they see the normal red flags for inventory. So if I look at a cultivation center, I'm looking at the immature products or clones. They live or die. They either move on into veg and flower and beyond, or they die, or they get sold. And so if I look at each stage of the cannabis plant, and if it's in veg, I know I shouldn't have any veg plants in my inventory system that are more than 2 months old. I know I shouldn't have any tracking tags that are active for flower that are more than 3 or 4 months old. And so if I know how to look at my inventory system and I look for, multiple adjustments in one day, 15 or more adjustments in one day, throws off a red flag. Maybe it's time to throw an inspector in there. And so that's what 2 or 3 days of missing uploading inventory. Because sometimes these inventory systems, and again, they'll remain nameless, but you hit upload and it says upload successful. But was it? No, it wasn't. You have to go behind the scenes and verify that it was. And so you have to do trust and verify, which is an extra accounting process, because some of these state mandated tracking systems weren't meant to manage marijuana. I'll just be fair.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, we know it's costly to be in compliance. Can you talk to us? This is kind of a 2-part question. Talk to us. Everyone loves to hear a war story. Tell us something that you've heard that we will never do, type of thing. So I'm curious if you can kind of share something like, hey, this went wrong and this is kind of what it could have been, corrected and done right. And then if you elaborate on that, and then I'm also just curious of what are the ramifications of an infraction, right? And then likewise, if someone is to control that and mitigate that risk, what would a cannabis operator be seen to spend in compliance? Do they need one person just to manage the system, or does your technology kind of help reduce headcount? We're all about making sure that everybody can kind of increase their bottom line, as this industry is super expensive just to participate in. So if you could kind of share and elaborate on those 2 parts of the question.
Yeah, absolutely. So they shall remain nameless, but a business here in Colorado was a medical business. And then when they were a medical business, back in the day, it was very gray area on where your plants originated from. They just wanted to know that all your plants were tracked. And then now when we switched into the recreational environment in Colorado, which will be a similar thing in California, Where did those plants come from? Where did they originate from? And so in Colorado, we need an origination transport manifest. I need an official record that said these plants came from someplace. And so that was the problem we have, and the problem they're having in Nevada and things like that back in the day. But and so this business went out and purchased at random dispensaries a bunch of different strains and clones, and that's where they started their plant origination, because that's what they did on the medical side. Mm-hmm. And they did not do the transport manifest and properly manifest each one from a licensed establishment with a recreational purpose, purchased on a recreational license, which they were supposed to. And so if you can imagine, they built up this massive inventory. 3 months later, they were inspected. The origination issue came up. They were unable to prove it. They basically got down to the bottom of the issue. $500,000 in inventory had to be destroyed.
Wow.
During this issue, they found some marijuana plant that was unidentified, right? So it didn't have a tag. When I walk into a building as an inspector and I see any marijuana, where does it live? Where's the tag that identifies this and where this lives? Because if I don't see a tag, if I don't see an identifier, then it could be diversion. There could be issues like that. Where does this marijuana live? Is it in your state mandated tracking system or your inventory tracking system? Things of that nature. And so they ran into that problem. At the same time, one of their hard drives fried with their security and surveillance at one of their dispensaries. And so where do investigators go when they run into issues and problems? They go to the security and surveillance system. And so that's why it's number 2 on our list for the most frequency of occurrence on infractions or violations of security and surveillance, because if you go to the security and surveillance system and it's not properly configured, then that's where they notice it. And so in Colorado, you're supposed to get a notification if you have a hard drive failure or a DVR failure. And if you have a DVR failure, it's a public safety issue. And so that's a violation. It's a violation of the show cause hearing. Wow. And so that process with inventory and the security and surveillance issue, with the hard drive frying, the security and surveillance guy showed up to service all the cameras. When he got to the cultivation center, he was working on the camera system. The camera system went out for an hour and a half while he was working on it. During that time period, the stars aligned in a bad way, and an employee decided to be helpful and to start destroying marijuana product and plant and then taking it to the dumpster because it was all quarantined. And when you quarantine, it has to physically stay there. It has to be physically and virtually separated from all these other plants and things like that. But his entire lot or business was quarantined. And so if you look at that process, it was the stars aligning there as well. And so all things said, more than 15 violations, but we were able to put in a very proactive plan in place, and it was a 3-month suspension, and then they were allowed to come back, and now they're up and running. And so what we do now is I will physically go by this business to the various locations, and I inspect it and to make sure everything's okay. So they've hired me as a third-party inspector. And then they also would use our software internally so they can do their own internal compliance, right, self-assessment. Yeah. And so that's what we can do for them. And then when we go in, we review their SOPs, all of those things to make sure that they're as bulletproof as possible. Because what do you want to do? You need to look 95% there in the first 20 minutes of inspection. If you don't, and things are missing, and the logs look terrible, and the regulators can hit the low-hanging fruit, that's when they roll up their sleeves and they look for more. And so that's one example of a client that, all things told, with the closure and everything else, close to $1 million as far as an impact.
Wow.
Right? And a fairly well-run facility, but had an origination problem, like a problem with the DVR, and then a problem with the helpful employee. And so that's what I try to teach these license owners, is that you've got 400 or 500 moving compliance points on this license, and it's ebbing and flowing. And you can't trust a Joe or a Mary to make sure you're sorted. You need an automated solution like ours where you can continually go in there and use the software to make sure you are compliant.
Absolutely. I was going to ask, what are 3 reasons you've been able to build such a strong brand and company? But just hearing you talk, you cover so many different aspects of compliance, and hearing you mention just those small details that can derail your entire company. What would you say has helped you build a strong brand?
I would say, when you come down to it, every marijuana license owner needs our services. And it depends on what stage you're in. But if you're in the pre-application stage, like some clients in Pennsylvania, they would purchase our SOPs online, right? And we sell a very robust template online that's also part of a service, a broader service where we provide implementation services as well. But we're not looking to charge a massive amount up front. At the end of the day, we would love for you to utilize our software, download our software from the Apple Store, and then utilize that to do inspections. And our clients use our software to not only do inspections and assessments, but they also do it as a knowledge base, and they use it for training. And so you can open up a section of labeling, packaging, and product safety, and in a half-hour staff meeting, review 25 questions so everybody's up to speed on what compliance is.
Totally.
When it comes for product intake and things like that. And so one of the things we do is our clients let us know that we help them sleep better at night. Also, a more compliant business is a more valuable business. So if you look at valuation, if you're a non-compliant business, and I'm going to purchase you, I have to come in and I have to spend money on remediative action to improve the business. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the day, that's going to cost me money, and I want a lower purchase price coming in. And so for some of these investors out there, I wouldn't buy a license unless I knew what the compliance score was and what I had to do to correct or improve it. And then also, does it have any previous enforcement or disciplinary actions? Because if it does, those remain with the license. And so we see a lot of that going on as well. But really, every stakeholder, long answer short, is that I feel they need our services. At the end of the day, they need to understand what the risk is.
But I want to elaborate on Kristen's question. You are brilliant. Like, you are, you designed something, you came from management consulting. Like, what traits do you think it is that has been able to allow you and your team to, besides the software, because always the product speaks for itself, but you're a leader. So what are some traits that got you to where you are today?
Honestly, I'm going to say it's repetition. I've inspected personally over 300 some licenses myself. And so with my background and experience in management consulting and in enterprise software implementation with like Oracle and SAP and companies like that, a lot of what we do is problem solving every day. And so when I walk into a business, I'm able to see what they don't see, right? When you're inside the box, it's really hard to see what's going on. If I'm coming in outside and I've done 300 inspections with automated software, on most of these businesses, I can really, in the first hour or so, develop a plan for them to proactively improve. And then, given a couple hours going through and doing an inspection and corrective action, making sure that they have everything in place. And so I think it's the repetition of me being in this, and then all we do is compliance. That's it. We do regulatory and financial compliance for cannabis licenses, and we haven't really jumped into application support services and consulting and all of that. We're really trying to just stay on compliance. And at the end of the day, the true value of our business is the data. We're sitting on hundreds of thousands of data points on operational cannabis compliance, and we know statistically where they fail and how they fail. And so that is where the true value of our business really lies. And then we're using the software to collect as much compliance data as we can to improve as many of these operations as we can.
That's incredibly smart, especially the data. Data is king and something relatively new to our industry. So we're going to get to the speed round now to ask you a few quick questions. Are you ready?
Sure.
All right. Get pumped up.
Okay, so if someone's just getting into the industry, what is something they should know?
Run away. No, I'm just joking.
Hey, no.
Yeah.
It's a little Monty Python joke for a Friday afternoon. But,
I love it.
So, obviously, I'm going to be biased and say compliance. If you're getting into the industry, what are you doing? If you're in ancillary businesses, how are you helping these businesses improve at a daily basis? And then if you're a licensed operation, how are you improving daily for compliance? And then having the right tools in place, right? Sitting an employee down in the first 2 hours of their first day, they read things, they're taken around, they're shown things, and they're able to be successful. So I think start from that and then actually read the regulatory code. It's very valuable to understand that these are the rules of the road.
Absolutely.
All right, you're a very busy man. So what motivates you to keep on going?
There's so much more to do. We are not in every state that's out there. We have opportunity to translate our software for Puerto Rico. We have opportunity in Canada and Australia. My background, I have an international MBA. And so I'm very interested in taking this software platform, which we already have Amazon and Apple for distribution of our, secure, compliant, encrypted platform. It's completely scalable. So the way I've built this and the way we have everything in place, that's really what we're looking forward to, is taking this to the next level.
And with that said, where do you see Adherence Compliance in a year from now?
I honestly think that our natural evolution right now is to be acquired by a company that really kind of sees our value, and that is a great vehicle for us to expand our services. So because we have licensing revenue, we have services revenue from the software, we have compliance program revenue, standard operating procedure revenue, adherence training services revenue. That's one thing we didn't speak about, but we do a 2-day intensive training course for cannabis compliance, and you learn about statistics and where these businesses fail. And that's why it's so rich for some of these folks to come in and take our compliance training. And so we're really looking for a vehicle to expand and take it to the next level. And I can't continue running everything forever. There's only so much time in a day.
Yeah, totally. 80-20 principle. And I know we actually have a ton of international listeners out there. So hopefully, we'll put your contact info and link everything in the show notes on our website. But hopefully you'll be able to get contacted by some people because, as you mentioned, this is such an international business. Kristen was talking to somebody from South Africa.
Yeah.
They look like they're hopefully kind of moving forward at least to get something going. And there's just, the sky's our limit. And you're right, it's time.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, thank you
so
much for joining Cannabis Business Minds. So that was such an interesting discussion with Steve. I couldn't even believe what we learned.
It made me feel really good to know that we have been completely on it. Like, we're so aware and in tune with these issues, and of the two issues.
Inventory. It's so crazy. Like, inventory seems that people need to be paying attention to it. The fact that he said 3 out of 4 operators fail because they're not adhering to
in regulated states
into their inventory, and that's just going to be exponential if Californian operators don't get it right.
And to start inventory practices at the beginning, because when you get busier, you cannot catch up. It's a losing battle.
To implement it, and trying to build a plane and fly it at the same time, right?
Totally. So we've got Jackie, who we're interviewing on our show next time. But she's here, and it's interesting to hear from your perspective. The listeners might be like, "What up?" But it's a very good teaser because you'll be the next episode they're going to listen to.
Yeah.
But so yes, that for sure, and
then compliance is the number one barrier to entry, savior, and success. And the point is, really, compliance is the only cost you don't see on financial projections. Yet, it could be the most expensive investment you make in your company.
If you don't do it right.
Yes. Or just to keep up with compliance. It changes constantly. So you have to have compliance. A compliance officer, compliance software, whatever it is, compliance will save you or kill you.
Absolutely. No, so that was a great session. And
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you all for listening to Cannabis Business Minds. Please subscribe to us on iTunes, and we'll check you next week.
Yeah, definitely subscribe so you catch the next episode with Jackie, who's on, who you had just heard there for a second.
All right, guys.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye. Cannabis Business Minds is recorded by Simone Samaluka-Radzins and Kristen Yoder. Produced and edited by Gustavo Bogac at East Venice Recording Studios. Podcast music is by Ketza. You can find more episodes of the show on our website, liv-consulting.com, and you can also subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.